We have been looking at a website that was created by Nick Kay. The website focuses on mapping and interactive mapping of performance art, ephemeral conceptual art, and other event practices that took place in the public sphere in San Francisco and the Bay Area from 1969 to 1985. Each student focused on an artist, but the way that they presented that artist also was very personal. It was really the students who came up with the way of presenting the artist's work. So in some cases, the actual work was presented. In some cases, there were kind of reconstructions of work. There were reenactments. There were interpretations. There were new kinds of histories made. That was, I think, particularly important because it carried forward the creative energy and the just sense of experimentation and wanting to kind of find a new way, a new path into some kind of knowledge that was so present in the artworks themselves. Each of the artists that was chosen primarily work on their own as solo performance artists, and they were all looking at questions around the body and the absence of the body, some aspect of spirituality or sort of otherness that happens when one is performing using the body as a sort of central tool. Some of the artists that we looked at are still alive, so there's an opportunity to interview them and to also access their archive and in some cases their artworks that were made quite a long time ago. And in other cases, the artists have died and the students were able to access associates or go to galleries or find information about that artist practice in another way. All in all, I feel like we expanded the understanding of the practices of these 6 artists within the context of San Francisco art history, but also within the context of a broader performance and conceptual art history. The other important aspect of the exhibition is that there was a lot of potential for interacting with the artworks, whether it be put on a headset or 3D glasses or some other way of cutting newspaper into collage. So it invited the audience to become a participant and in the end a performer, which is so central to our project.
Performances, they all happened at a place. That's the really interesting thing that doesn't get brought up a ton in the history of performances, is where they happen and what that space is like. So that's kind of the impulse for a history of these things that is very rooted in sight. So for everyone's sites, took photos of the places, and then those photos were used to sort of represent the places in which they happened, but the different character that those places take on now than they did in the past. I focused on a performance that he did at an artist-run space in the Soma district called 80 Langton, which was actually a space that he co-founded with a few other artists. In the time that the space was running, it became one of the most influential alternative spaces and project spaces here in the city. One of the shows that he did there was a performance called Composition in Deep / Light at the Opera. As you walk into the gallery, I put up a big white square wall, which was a reference to his white cube, and then I had red and blue light shining on that, and then on the other side I had an available set of 3D glasses so you could view the people interacting with that. What I liked, and this is not necessarily something that came out of Pomeroy's work, but was my own, was that it's a little involuntary how much you interact with it because it's right at the door. Everybody that walked in had to at some point cast a shadow on this and be part of work.
I chose the artist James Lee Byers, who was very much focused on performance art as well as creating works of art themselves though. And through this experience I really got introduced to the question and how far what kind of ephemera and primary as well as secondary sources are important in order to get close to an artwork or to an artist who has performed in the past and has signified life and culture in a moment, and in how far We were introduced to ideas of the archaeology of presence and the environment and culture and infrastructure and how far those influence a moment of time and an ability to experience a performance or a site. For me, it was more, as I did in The Perfect Presence, a work of getting close to the artist through his own work, not necessarily defined by the critical conversations already formed around it, although exposing myself to that knowledge, but more so studying his dimensions, the colors of his work, the scales, and therefore realizing how he worked with color, with energy, and how he impacted space and maybe a consciousness through his work, accessing it more through a physical and through my own artistic experience and process than purely intellectually.
I really like it, the way that he was always fighting against cancer, how his work is really attached to his body, his idea about sound. So it's kind of how this kind of energy transfer is still can be used, not the same way, but in a different way. So it was really important to make the instrument work and people be able to make sounds of it. The whole exhibition, I think, was interesting how we tried to address something that is not here, but at the same time create an environment that you experience something that is not just documentation, that it's also like a little bit interactive and performative itself.
What I put together was the interactive Dada piece. It was this enactment of a piece that happened at the Dada 84 festival, which was a week-long Dada festival that happened in 1984 in San Francisco at Hotel Utah, which is one of the images that's on the big banner that was in the gallery. There was a poem, a Dada poem piece, and where people would cut up words out of newspaper articles, mix them up in a bag, and then one by one take out each single word and record them as they came out, and it would become a poem. And so we recreated this, and people posted their poems on, wrote them down and posted them on the wall. And I didn't realize that people would actually get into it, and so there were a lot of really fun, interesting poems that came out of that. My favorite thing about researching was getting to know Jenny Lloyd. She lives in Florida, and I got to have really great phone calls with her and got to hear all these anecdotes about the different pieces that happened and hear about the other artists that she worked with and other artists that she keeps in touch with today. And a lot of her work blurs the boundary between everyday life and art, and she really mixes between making her whole practice a part of her life.
Hang on, there's some people coming here. Woo! Okay, good.
Eva, she did her research on Daryl Sapien, and Daryl Sapien's a local artist. One of the pieces in particular that she reinvented was a piece that happened with the San Francisco Ballet. She recreated it in a way with having vinyls on the wall, which was representative of a scrim that was on the stage, and the dancers danced beneath it. And so we had an image next to this vinyl of the dancers, and it was encouraged for people to reenact and make the same shapes as the dancers did.
My artist was Linda Montana, that I was focusing on her works. She's a performance artist, and I was very interested in her works related to what she does about performance and live performance, and mostly endurance. Every year during the 7 years, she wears one color for the whole year, and she limits herself, and I did the same thing during the exhibition. And I had every day of the exhibition one color. I thought, if I do that performance live for a week, this brings that live sense to the exhibition. Linda Montana and Tom Marioni were handcuffed for 3 days. They were tied to each other for 3 days, and for 10 minutes they document themselves. The interesting thing about this performance was performed from the November 2nd in 1973 till November 5th. That's exactly the same time as this exhibition.
Research that we've done will be added to the artist files in the archives at the San Francisco Art Institute Library, and that will also be contributing works to the website that had not been there before.